Quinton Gordon is Canadian, so yeah, he's nice and he's polite, but don't let that fool you. Underneath the demeanor is a simmering creative drive that routinely boils over in photographic form. He's an educator, scientist, advocate, craftsman, husband, and dad. He's been a kayak guide in the Arctic, a Latin American vagabond, and he's won a lot of shiny things for his photographic efforts. Walk with him through coastal rainforest, and the man knows his plants, trees, berries, and history. I feel fortunate to call him a friend. 15 years worth of friend, actually. Our friendship is one-sided, however, because I am the recipient of his being. I look at the images on the wall, the handcrafted creations, and I know that I'm the beneficiary of his focus and skill. He reminds me the easy way isn't always the best way. He reminds me that slowing down is essential if impact is the mission. You cannot just walk by. Stop and pay attention. Fold it, glue it, staple it, and then print it up, repeatedly, until it sings. He lives and works on the unceded ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, known today as Vancouver Island.
Any book. Well, I guess more than anything, it's the consolidation of a more complex thought. And that's what I think I enjoy most about it is as much as I have a love affair with the power of a single image, it's more of a complex expression of an idea that you can achieve through a book format. The intimacy of a book, the relationship as a reader/viewer that you have with it. It's completely, analog in its experience. You can have it anywhere. Those are all the things that for me and the tactile, the visceral kind of haptic experience of it too, like literally how a book feels in your hand, the texture of pages, the ink on a page. For me, these things matter not more than the work it contains, but they're really, I think that whole package, the intentionality and thoughtfulness that can go into it means a lot. It's not really either. It's more of an idea. For me, it's like this photography for me has always been an investigation of something I'm interested in or I'm curious about or that I don't understand. And so that's usually the starting point that as a visual artist, for me, the chosen way to explore that has been with a camera. But then as it builds, and because none of that can be explored in a single image, the book forms out of that. And it becomes, the articulation of that, of the discovery process. For me, the limited editions are often really a physical pragmatic thing. So I'm working with, I find that I'm choosing consistently over and over again to work with analog materials, typically ones that make it about as difficult as possible to make an image. So the physical constraints on their own limit the addition of what I can produce in most cases. And then along the way in the book process, everything I just spoke to became really important to it, as well as the whole transaction for me. Like the act of creating for me is actually really important because it's part of how I distill my sense of place in the world, how I distill the things I'm thinking about. So the time it takes to either literally create the film in the sense of working with old collodion processes, or even the cumbersome nature of the materials and processes I work with, through to hand making a book and really thinking about the haptics of it and the choices. So, a recent book used 4 different handmade Japanese papers, and each paper was selected to have a physical tactile experience related to the image. And so all of those pieces are really important, but you can't scale them up easily. They're not scalable, so they're limited by virtue of their own process. For many years it was, the Leica. I discovered Leica when I was in university. I went to school with the son of the fellow who was running the Leica factory in Midland, Ontario at the time, which will age me if anybody knows their Leica history. And I was like, he was running around with this camera, and I'm like, what is that? And he lent, I think it was an M4, probably an M4, maybe an M4P, lent it to me for a weekend. And it was like, this just works. I just get it. This is how I see the world. And so for many years, it was my primary camera for most things. I even did an assignment for Outside magazine photographing the hoiho, or yellow-eyed penguin, the rarest penguin in the world. I showed up with a Leica and they were like, what the fuck, dude? Where's the big lens, and where's the, the Nikon or the Canon or whatever? And yeah, and the irony of it is it ended up, I created, what became the Millennium Image for the Department of Conservation with a Leica and a 35mm, probably a 50mm lens, which was the only two lenses I brought, a 35 and a 50. But I think somewhere, well, I know actually along the way as photography went digital and I was kind of forced into that sphere of working digitally, like many, I had a bit of a visceral reaction kind of against it and wanted to stay connected. I grew up around artists, so I grew up around people who made things with their hands, and photography was becoming less about that. And process does not make, is not enough to make a photograph interesting. It's the marriage of idea, execution in an image, but the physicality of it, the tactile nature. So that's, at that point, I started moving to larger format, working with more historical processes, or certainly, more obscure analog processes. In many cases, it was a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio, so that invited working with a larger, heavier, more cumbersome camera. And something really worked for me in that. As much as difficult as it is, that difficulty puts you very much in the moment. I will travel, 500, kilometers and spend a day making 2 frames, and they're really satisfying frames.
Is that something that you cut?
No, 6. No, so I mean, I did use 8x10 for a while. It's a 6x8, 6.5 by 8.5. It's called whole plate. It's a very, again, in the earlier history of cameras, a very traditional format that is quite a bit more obscure. It would have been smarter to just stick with the 8x10. It's easier to source pieces and materials, but I have a tendency to want to make things as difficult as possible because that difficulty somehow elevates the whole experience. Although there are days I just really want to go back to walking around with my Leica. So. Often it's both. In most cases they work in tandem. Although, producing and hosting an exhibition is, it's a big ordeal. It's a big expense. It doesn't typically give you a great return on investment, certainly in photography. So, I mean, I sell prints. I make prints, but it's more I'm making those prints in very small quantities, building up slowly a collector following who seems to have, for whatever reason, an appreciation for what I'm doing and buying that work and trying to just slowly grow that. I've largely given up on having big exhibitions and investing large amounts of money in doing that. Books, I think other people relate to them. People run out of wall space too. So, a book you can put on a shelf, you can have it on a coffee table. Again, going back to that intimacy, they have it in their world. They share it in a different way with people. There's more story connected. I think it taps into not just the story that's contained in the work, but the story in terms of, how it's made. People enjoy that full package of what went into creating something and why. Yeah, I think that's, again, going back to finding my own place, in the world. So most of my life, I made most of my, my professional work was around cultural documentary. It was focused around people, right? Telling other people's stories, and cultures defined not necessarily only by ethnicity, but by how people gather around an idea or a concept. And it had the benefit of working in many places in the world, which is the other reason that the whole penguin photograph or assignment was totally obscure. I'm not a wildlife photographer. Why give me that assignment? I'm going to assume it's because they wanted something different, and they certainly got it. But for me, it was the counterbalance to it. It was the counterbalance to working with the intensity of people and my own relationship to sort of nature. It grounds me. And so as I start to investigate ideas, which ultimately are still connected, like, this, latest of, it's actually a trilogy of projects that 2 of which are done. So Presence was about really being present in the kind of global economic and sort of political sphere that we live in. It was about making a choice to be very present and to ground myself in nature and to find a way to use photography to be part of that. And so again, this big cumbersome camera, carrying it out into the forest, you have no choice but to be very focused, very present, very calm. It's quite a Zen sort of experience. I find it hard to make a picture not on a tripod now for that reason, because it is a very contemplative aspect to the process that comes with really, truly slowing down, not just the kind of cliche of, oh, film slows me down. It's like, well, we can slow ourselves down with the right choices, but certainly the materials, and I'm interested in materiality, and I'm interested in how that impacts how we think. I think in some ways it's probably, a lot of it's quite introspective. I mean, although I sell it and I publish it to make it sort of publicly accessible, it's very personal. And I think the big step up for me was when I let go of making anything that I thought somebody would connect to, and went very much to the core of making work that was first and foremost important to me. And of course, inevitably what happens with that is it does resonate with more people. But yeah, I remember the whole transition here. There was a transition phase that started in kind of 2010-ish, maybe a little earlier, when our daughter was very young. And there wasn't much work around. We were so kind of recovering from the big collapse of 2008, 2009. And I started making pictures. And I started with a set of pictures that I was pretty sure people would connect to. And they were good pictures. But then somewhere along the line, something flipped. And I really started making pictures solely for myself. And I did it very quietly. I didn't show the work to anyone for 2 years. And then that was actually my first handmade book. It was very primitively made. I thought it was great at the time, but I realize now how primitive my bookmaking skills were. But it was very much, I made all of the choices in it. I made every image mattered to me. And I had no thought of whether it connected with anyone else, but it really did. And that kind of launched me into this whole trajectory of the value of making work from a very authentic place and then working with it with my hands, putting together these books. It's always time. Yeah, it's, time is the most precious resource. The materials, like everything, have gotten more expensive. People say, oh, well, film's crazy expensive. Well, a good digital camera's not cheap either. And, travel isn't cheap, but really it's having the luxury of the most valuable resource being time, because it also, in this whole process, it's not just going out, making a picture and coming back. It's not transactional in that sense. It's really being immersed in the idea, in the space that you're working. And that's true whether it's cultural documentary or this, more personal work that for me is really investigated through the landscape, but it's not about the landscape at all, actually. Completely. In fact, I tried to advise them against it, and they've clearly ignored my advice.